What if the strongest scream you'll ever make is silence? Imagine opening your bedroom door, fresh stitches still aching from surgery, only to find the man who vowed to protect you busy holding another woman right there on your wedding bed. No shouting, no shattered glass, just quiet steps backward, a closed door, and a life that would never be the same again. Clara stepped out of the hospital doors with a strange mixture of relief and nervous excitement. She was leaving a place that smelled like antiseptic and quiet despair, eager to trade it for the warm, lived-in scent of home. She didn't call Nathan to let him know she was coming. She wanted it to be a surprise, a small, sweet victory after days of sterile hallways and IV drips. In her mind, she painted vivid pictures, Nathan's eyes lighting up as he saw her, his arms pulling her close, careful not to squeeze too hard where the stitches still felt tender. A soft dinner together at their little dining table, candles flickering, laughter chasing away the remnants of fear that had haunted her in that hospital bed. She pressed her hand lightly over her side, as if to remind herself, "You made it through. Now go home to him, to the life waiting." The taxi pulled up to her street just as the late afternoon sun bathed everything in a warm golden glow. It was the kind of light that made sidewalks sparkle and even cracked brick walls look tender, almost forgiving. Clara paid the driver with a soft smile, clutching her small overnight bag a little tighter as she stepped out. She drew in a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill her lungs, feeling almost giddy with the thought that this was finally over. The surgery, the sterile rooms, the endless waiting. Everything here looked so perfect. The old oak trees lining the block swayed gently, leaves whispering secrets. A couple across the street laughed as they shared an ice cream cone. Somewhere, wind chimes danced with a playful tune. Clara's steps up the familiar staircase felt light, hopeful. When she reached her door, she let her fingers linger on the handle for just a heartbeat. This is it, she thought. Home, love, safety. Her key turned easily in the lock, opening the door to a promise she didn't yet know was about to shatter. Clara set her bag down by the door, heart fluttering with tender anticipation. She moved through the living room, noticing Nathan's jacket tossed over the couch, a half-finished cup of coffee, papers scattered, all ordinary signs of life that made her smile faintly. But then she heard it, a light, playful giggle, muffled words, a woman's voice, coming from down the hall. Her stomach twisted painfully. Slowly, as if her feet belonged to someone else, Clara walked toward their bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, a narrow band of warm light cutting across the dark hallway. She pushed it open. Time stopped. Inside, Nathan lay tangled in their sheets with another woman, bodies close, faces still lit with leftover laughter. When Nathan's eyes met Clara's, his expression crumpled in an instant, from careless joy to sheer, naked panic. The woman beside him gasped, clutching the blanket to her chest, eyes wide with shock. Clara didn't scream. She didn't sob or demand why. She just stood there, silent, as if silence itself was the only shield she had left. Clara didn't remember turning around. Her body simply moved, almost on instinct, pulling her away from that room, away from the wreckage of every promise she ever believed in. She walked back through the hallway, past the living room, where Nathan's coffee still sat, past the front door that now felt like the edge of a cliff. Behind her, there was only stunned silence. Nathan and the woman were too shocked, too tangled in their own guilt and fear to say a single word. Clara reached for the doorknob with hands that barely felt real. She pulled it shut gently, almost tenderly. There was no slamming, no dramatic exit, just a quiet click as the latch caught. And then it was only Clara standing outside her own apartment, her heart thundering so wildly she thought it might burst through her ribs. Her breaths came quick and shallow, each inhale scraping at the back of her throat. That was the sound of everything breaking. Not glass, not screams, just her pulse hammering out the first beats of a brand new life she never asked for. Clara didn't know how long she'd been walking. Her feet moved on their own, taking her down the gray, uneven sidewalk, past strangers who seemed impossibly whole, laughing into their phones, hurrying to dinner reservations, living lives that hadn't just shattered. The wind picked up sharp and biting against her skin. It cut right through her thin jacket and slapped against the fresh stitches on her side. Clara winced instinctively, pressing a hand to the wound, feeling the pain blossoming under her palm. For a moment, everything around her blurred. Streetlights turned to smears of gold. Car horns sounded distant, muffled by the roar of her pulse. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands, scrolled desperately through her contacts until she landed on the one name that felt like solid ground: Rachel. When Rachel answered, Clara's voice broke into a whisper that was barely there. "I need you." Rachel opened her apartment door so fast, Clara barely had time to knock. It was as if Rachel had been waiting there the whole time, senses sharpened by instinct and friendship. The moment Clara stepped inside, Rachel pulled her into a hug so tight it nearly broke what was left of Clara's fragile composure. Rachel's arms were strong, anchoring, and her cheek pressed against Clara's temple, warm and real, in a way Clara hadn't felt for days. Hey, it's okay. You're safe now." "I've got you," Rachel whispered, though her voice carried a fire that promised no one would hurt Clara again, not without going through her first. When Rachel pulled back just enough to look at Clara's face, her eyes weren't just full of sympathy, they burned with a cold, deliberate fury. "Tell me everything," she said, her tone low, controlled, dangerous, in a way that made Clara feel, for the first time since that bedroom door swung open, that she might actually be okay. Rachel didn't waste time on gentle platitudes or empty promises. Her apartment glowed with soft lamplight. The air scented faintly of chamomile tea, but the calm was deceptive. This wasn't a place for tears anymore. It was a war room. She sat Clara down at the kitchen table, pulled out a notepad, and started scribbling with the kind of precise, razor-sharp focus that made her a feared attorney in court. "Here's what we're going to do," Rachel said, voice low but vibrating with controlled power. "First, we lock down your money, cancel your cards, freeze your joint accounts so he can't drain them while you're vulnerable." Clara nodded shakily, her hands curled around the warm mug Rachel pressed into them earlier. She could already feel the heat of resolve start to replace the cold pit in her stomach. "Next, we change the locks. Tomorrow. No delays. That apartment is legally yours, and he's going to learn exactly what that means." Rachel paused, meeting Clara's eyes with a fierce steadiness. "By the time he figures out what hit him, he'll be on the outside looking in." Clara's shoulders trembled, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was the adrenaline of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to leap, finally realizing she could fly. The locksmith arrived right on schedule, a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and a calm, businesslike air. He barely said more than a polite good afternoon before getting to work, spreading out his tools on the hardwood floor like a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Clara hovered nearby, arms wrapped around herself, watching as the old locks came off with small metallic groans. Each turn of his wrench, each removed screw, felt like peeling away another layer of Nathan's hold on her life. Then came the new hardware, sleek, heavy-duty brushed steel, with a deadbolt that clicked into place with a satisfying finality. The locksmith handed Clara 2 identical keys, warm from his pocket. "All set, ma'am. Nobody's getting through that door without these." Clara took the keys into her palm, staring at them as if they were medals pinned on her chest. proof that she had survived, that she had drawn a line Nathan couldn't cross anymore. "Thank you," she whispered, voice catching on a raw mix of relief and wonder. The locksmith just nodded, gave her a small, knowing smile, the kind strangers sometimes share when they somehow understand the deeper story without needing to be told. Clara moved through the apartment in a quiet, measured way, as if each step needed careful negotiation with the past. She took out Nathan's suitcase from the closet, the same one he'd wheeled beside her on countless vacations filled with shared dreams. Now it would carry only fragments of a life she no longer claimed. She started with his shirts, folded each one neatly, almost ritualistically, before placing them in the case. Then his jeans, his belts, the watch he swore was an anniversary gift just because he loved her. It all went in without hesitation. Next came the drawer of papers, insurance forms, tax documents, Nathan's passport. Clara stacked them carefully. She wanted him to have no reason to return, no excuse to step back over the threshold she had sealed shut. Each item felt like lifting away a lie, like plucking out a thorn that had been buried too deep for too long. When she zipped up the suitcase, it was with a finality that sent a small shiver through her shoulders, not from fear, but from release. She rolled it to the hallway outside the apartment door, set it upright, and stood there for a long breath. Then Clara stepped back inside, closing the new lock behind her, heart pounding not with panic, but with something startlingly close to peace. Nathan came home later that evening, whistling under his breath, rehearsing in his head the same tired speech he thought would smooth everything over. A mix of half-baked apologies, cheap excuses, and manipulations he had used on Clara countless times before. He slid his key into the lock and froze. It wouldn't turn. Confused, he pulled it out, checked it, tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. A spark of panic ignited behind his ribs. Nathan's confusion twisted into irritation, then surged into hot, unfiltered rage. He banged his fist against the door so hard the frame rattled. "Clara, open the damn door!" he shouted, voice cracking with a raw edge that betrayed his sudden loss of control. He slammed his palm against the wood again and again, demanding entrance to the life he thought he still owned. But inside, Clara stood perfectly still, hand over her heart, feeling it race, not with fear of him, but with the electric thrill of finally shutting him out. Outside, Nathan's fury was nothing more than muffled thunder against her walls. And it was the most empowering silence she had ever known. It didn't take long for the noise to draw curious eyes. Apartment doors cracked open just a sliver, cautious faces peeking out from the safety of their homes. A woman across the hall watched with her hand over her mouth. An older man leaned on his cane, eyebrows raised, as if silently judging the spectacle Nathan was making of himself. Nathan didn't care. Or maybe he cared too much. His pride burned hotter than his reason. He pounded on the door again and again until the skin on his knuckles turned an angry, swollen red. "Clara!" he roared, voice raw, cracking at the edges. "Open this door right now! You owe me that much!" But the door stayed shut. It didn't matter how loud he got or how many witnesses gathered to see his meltdown. Clara was gone. At least the Clara who would have once opened that door, terrified of his temper, desperate to soothe his rage. Inside, Clara sat on the floor with her back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. She didn't need to see his humiliation. She could feel the shift in power, the final snapping of the last thread he ever held over her. For the first time, Nathan truly understood. He no longer had any power here. Not over this door, not over this woman, not anymore. Rachel sat at her dining table, papers spread out like a battlefield. Bank statements, emails, old text records, evidence carefully pieced together by her razor-sharp mind. When Clara walked in, Rachel didn't sugarcoat it. She slid a printed email chain across the table with a hard, controlled expression. Turns out, Nathan's been consulting with a divorce attorney for months, Rachel said, her voice clipped and icy. He was just waiting for you to finish paying off most of the mortgage so he could walk away with half. Clara's breath hitched in her throat. The room seemed to spin for a second. Her hands clutched the edge of the chair like she might fall off the earth completely. And then something unexpected happened. She started to laugh. It wasn't a joyful sound. It was sharp, hollow, like glass breaking inside her chest. The kind of laugh that came from realizing the monster under your bed had been sleeping there all along, wearing your husband's face. Well, Clara finally managed. Between jagged breaths, tears stinging her eyes. Guess he underestimated me too. Rachel's eyes softened, but the fire behind them burned even brighter. Yeah, and now we make sure he regrets it for the rest of his sorry life. Memories played across Clara's mind like cruel little films she couldn't shut off. The way Nathan had surprised her with flowers at work after a tough week, telling her she was his whole heart. The lazy Sunday mornings when he kissed her bare shoulder in the kitchen, whispering that forever would never be long enough. Even the small things, the inside jokes, the way he'd brush a crumb from her lip with such tender care, all of it was poison now. Because it wasn't love, it was strategy. Every sweet moment, every passionate promise had simply been a carefully placed brick in a foundation built to rob her blind. Clara pressed her palms against her temples, fighting back a wave of nausea. "How could I have been so blind?" she whispered into the quiet room. The words tasted bitter on her tongue, a confession and a curse all at once. But even as tears welled up, there was something else beneath them. Now a smoldering ember of rage, slow but sure. The beginning of a fire that would burn away every last remnant of his deception. Rachel sat across from Clara at her sleek mahogany desk, a stack of papers perfectly aligned before her. The city skyline glowed outside the tall windows, but inside, the only light that mattered was the fire in Rachel's eyes. "I've prepared everything," Rachel said, her voice smooth but edged like a honed blade. "This petition for divorce isn't just standard. I've locked it up tighter than Fort Knox. Every asset, every clause, every loophole closed. He's not getting a cent he doesn't legally deserve, which, by the way, is basically nothing." She pushed the papers toward Clara, who ran trembling fingers over her own name printed neatly at the top. For a long moment, Clara just stared. Then she picked up the pen, feeling its weight like a weapon in her hand. When she finally signed it, it was with a flourish that felt like slicing through the last tether Nathan ever had on her life. Rachel smiled slow and fierce. "There. Now we're done playing defense. From here on out, it's our game." Nathan's unraveling came fast and ugly. He called Clara's phone over and over, sometimes leaving desperate voicemails that cracked with panic. "Clara, please, just call me back. We can fix this, okay? You can't do this to us." Other times, his messages turned dark. "Answer me. I swear to God, if you make me look like a fool." Then he'd switch again, voice breaking into hollow sobs. "I love you. I made a mistake. Don't throw us away." Clara listened to each one exactly once, then deleted it. Her heart didn't seize with fear or ache with longing. It simply sat steady in her chest, calmly registering that Nathan's voice no longer held any power. Not over her choices, not over her peace. It was strange how quickly the monster lost his fangs once she stopped feeding him her fear. Word spread quickly. People who used to smile at Clara with easy warmth now watched her with a kind of cautious curiosity, the sort reserved for tragic headlines or messy neighborhood scandals. Some looked at her with gentle pity. Others whispered behind coffee cups, eyes glittering with thinly veiled delight. "Did you hear? He cheated on her. No, I think she just snapped. Well, at least she kept the apartment." Clara caught fragments of these hushed conversations at the grocery store, in the elevator, even waiting for her dry cleaning. Each snatched sentence cut a little, reminding her that even freedom could be lonely. So one afternoon, she made a choice. She took herself out to lunch, alone. Sitting at a small table by the window, she felt painfully exposed at first. Every laugh from another table, every clink of silverware seemed magnified, mocking. But as she sipped her iced tea, shoulders slowly relaxing, something unexpected stirred inside her. A fragile spark of self-possession. No Nathan, no forced smile to keep the peace, just Clara, eating what she wanted, lost in her own quiet thoughts. Freedom was still tender, but it tasted strangely sweet. Clara stood in the middle of the living room one last time. Sunlight poured through the windows, catching dust motes that danced lazily in the air. This was once her dream space, the place she and Nathan had decorated together, picking out paint swatches, arguing over rugs, laughing as they spilled takeout on the new couch. Now it was just empty walls, a hollow shell echoing with memories she no longer wanted. The realtor's handshake was brisk, professional. Within weeks, the apartment sold, a quick transaction that felt strangely cold for a place that had once held all her hopes. Clara walked out carrying only 2 suitcases and a small stack of photo albums she couldn't quite bring herself to throw away. When she handed over the keys, her hands were steady. Her heart was steadier still. The money from the sale hit her account the next day, enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere clean. It didn't feel like blood money. It felt like severance payment for surviving a dream that had turned into a nightmare. Clara's new apartment was tiny, barely 2 rooms and a cramped little balcony, but it was hers, entirely hers. The first thing she did was paint the walls a soft pastel blue, a shade that made the small space feel open, almost like it breathed along with her. She bought potted plants, lots of them, hanging ferns, sun-hungry succulents, a stubborn little fiddle leaf fig that insisted on living despite Clara's questionable watering schedule. She even hung up her own paintings canvases she had once tucked away in closets because Nathan had called them a little amateurish. Now they covered the walls like quiet celebrations of the parts of her he never cared to see. Every evening, Clara would light a single candle, curl up on her small couch, and let herself smile. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't grand, but it was peaceful, and most of all, it was hers. Clara first met Mrs. Quinn Henderson when she came upstairs one afternoon, balancing a pie tin still warm from the oven. "I baked too much again," the older woman said with a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Thought maybe you'd help me out." Mrs. Henderson had lived in the building for nearly 40 years. Her husband had passed 5 springs ago, leaving her with a quiet apartment filled with photographs and silence. Most days now, she baked. It was how she kept her hands busy, how she kept loneliness from creeping too deep. Clara invited her to stay, and they sat by the window on mismatched chairs, forks digging into flaky apple pie, cinnamon sweet on their tongues. They talked about loss, about how some people leave with slammed doors and cruel words, while others just slip away, gentle as dusk. And they talked about hope, too, the stubborn kind that grows in cracked sidewalks or in the heart of a woman painting her walls blue because she finally can. When Mrs. Henderson left that day, she squeezed Clara's hand. "You're going to be all right, dear," she said, and for the first time, Clara almost believed it. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. Clara was browsing through the fiction section of a cozy little bookstore, her fingers trailing along colorful spines. She wasn't really looking for anything, just killing time, enjoying the warm hush of paper and dust. Then she turned a corner and collided straight into someone's chest, hard enough that her shoulder jolted. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she blurted, stepping back. The man laughed, hands instinctively coming up, but not grabbing her, just hovering politely, as if to show he meant no harm. No harm done. I should have watched where I was going. His name was Michael. They ended up chatting awkwardly in the aisle for 15 minutes about favorite books and how this store made the best lavender lattes in the city. He didn't ask why she flinched when someone brushed past too close, didn't pry about her bare ring finger or the faint lines of old sorrow around her eyes. He just smiled, patient and open, like there was all the time in the world to learn about each other if she wanted to. When he finally asked if she'd like to grab coffee sometime, Clara surprised herself by saying yes. It was the first tiny crack of sunlight after a very long winter. It didn't happen all at once. Clara didn't suddenly wake up one morning with her heart wide open, ready to love again. No, it was slow, awkward, sometimes painfully raw. She'd flinch if Michael raised his hand too quickly, even just to brush a stray leaf from her hair. She found herself blurting out apologies for tiny things, afraid he might snap the way Nathan used to. One rainy evening, sitting together on her couch, she finally told him everything. About the hospital, about opening the bedroom door, about how silence had been her only weapon. Her voice shook, her hands fidgeted with the seam of a pillow, ready for judgment, pity, or worst of all, the polite retreat of someone who decided she was too broken to be worth it. But Michael didn't pull away. He simply took her trembling hands into his, squeezed them gently, and said, "Thank you for trusting me with your scars." Clara exhaled long and slow, like she'd been holding that breath for years. And in that fragile, flickering moment, she realized maybe, just maybe, this was how trust was rebuilt. Not with grand declarations, but with small, steady hands willing to hold your broken pieces. Clara and Michael's wedding wasn't grand or glittering. There were no towering floral arches, no endless guest lists filled with people they barely knew. Instead, it was small, intentionally so, held in the courtyard of a little inn that smelled of jasmine and old wood. The handful of guests were people who mattered deeply. Rachel, of course, standing front and center, eyes bright with unshed tears. Mrs. McCliff. Henderson from downstairs, beaming as if Clara were her own granddaughter, a few dear friends who had seen Clara at her very worst and still loved her fiercely. Michael took Clara's hands under strings of soft fairy lights, his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles, as if grounding them both to this exact perfect moment. When Rachel stood to give her toast, her voice trembled just a little. She raised her glass, her eyes locked on Clara. "She didn't rebuild her life," Rachel said, her throat tight with emotion. "She built a brand new one, and I can't think of anything braver." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of loss this time. They were bright, hopeful, and utterly free. Nathan became little more than a ghost. Sometimes Clara would catch a scent, the sharp tang of cedar cologne, and her mind would flicker back to nights on their old couch, heads tipped together, whispering forever. But the memory no longer stabbed at her. It drifted by like a pale wisp of fog, unable to take hold. Occasionally, his name still popped up in hushed conversations when she ran into old acquaintances. "He's remarried, you know," someone would say, their voice half gossip, half pity. Clara would just nod, offering a small, polite smile. Inside her heart was calm. Nathan no longer lived there. Not in her chest, not in her marrow. He was simply gone. And the space he once occupied was now wide open, full of sunlight, laughter, and gentle, ordinary days she never would have dreamed of back then. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor of her little apartment, a single candle flickering on the coffee table. Its glow painted soft amber waves across the walls, dancing gently over the green leaves of her plants, the imperfect strokes of her own paintings. Outside, the city hummed alive with distant laughter and the low purr of passing cars. Inside, it was hushed, a sacred kind of quiet that seemed to breathe with her. Clara closed her eyes and drew in a slow, steady breath. When she let it out, she whispered into the tender stillness, "I'm proud of you." Not for surviving Nathan, not even for finding Michael, but for daring to stay, to heal, to rebuild piece by fragile piece until her life felt entirely her own. When Clara opened her eyes, there were no tears, no bitterness twisting her mouth. Only the small, radiant curve of a smile, a pure, startling peace. Sometimes the most powerful declaration you'll ever make is silence. Not the kind that simmers with resentment or aches for someone to chase after you, but the kind that says, "I am done. I will not perform my pain for you. You don't get to watch me break." Because not everyone deserves front row seats to your heartbreak. Not everyone has earned the right to hear the cracking of your voice or see the tears you fight to keep private. Clara learned that truth the hardest way, and she carried it forward not as a scar to hide, but as quiet armor that shimmered beneath her skin. So when people whispered about her past or Nathan's name brushed against the edges of her new life, Clara simply smiled, eyes bright and unburdened. Sometimes the strongest echo of who you've become is the soft sound of your own footsteps walking away. Sometimes protecting your peace means choosing to walk away quietly without drama, without explanation. Because your healing isn't a show for others to watch. It's a sacred journey that belongs to you alone. Let Clara's story be a gentle reminder that you don't owe anyone a front row seat to your pain. It's okay to step back, to rebuild in silence, and to grow stronger without needing the world to understand. In the end, the most beautiful victories are the ones no one even knows you've won. If this story touched your heart, please hit subscribe and join us here at Beyond Boundaries. We bring you powerful stories that prove even quiet victories can echo for a lifetime.